a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. A world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. A world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together, we can forge women's equality. Collectively, we can all break the bias. My name is Christy Duncan, and I'm founder and CEO of Women in Payments, and it's my delight to welcome you all to this fantastic International Women's Day event. We are so blessed to have a fantastic panel for you here today to talk about breaking the bias from the perspective of our male allies. We've got speakers from around the world, Toronto, London, New York, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the moderator for our discussion today, John Cowan, who is Chief Technology and Operations Officer at Payments Canada and has a fantastic international banking background. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Christy, and it's an incredible pleasure to be here on International Women's Day. So I just want to talk a little bit about the incredible panel that we have coming up to work through this important topic, which is incredibly important to all of us here. Allyship is a verb, it's not a noun. It requires all of us, who you'll hear, even the panelists as they talk today, about continuously learning and working on what we can do to help. It's not a title that we give to ourselves. I've been incredibly fortunate to be part and work with Women in Payments and many incredible women leaders in my career. I think it's really important that we learn about our biases, and both conscious and unconscious, and you'll hear about that as part of the panel today. And it's never about ourselves. It's about taking action for this challenge as we move forward. Although International Women's Day is today, it should be every day, and what we do on an everyday basis is a consequence to the outcomes that we believe. So let me introduce the panel of our participants. I think they'll come on screen now, and I'll ask Naveed to start with to introduce himself, and I'll hand it over to Naveed first. Naveed.
Well, thank you very much, John and Christy. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. It's a pleasure to be over here. My name is Naveed Anwar, and I am the Global Head for Digital for TTS, which is Trade and Treasury Solutions at Citi. And my background is mainly around technology and product management for platforms. Spent quite a bit of time at Capital One prior to joining Citi, and then prior to that was at PayPal, AOL, and Netscape. Based out in San Jose, and a veteran Silicon Valley technologist.
The next panelist is Stephen.
Yeah, hi everyone. Steve Lappin here, so Managing Director of the International Corporate Payments Division within Barclays. That's the commercial issuing and the payment acceptance, including card acquiring business within the bank. I've been here for nearly 20 years working in payments, during which I've had the great pleasure of working with some incredibly talented women, one of whom put me forward for the panel today. So very much indebted to Nicole Olby. And I've tried to be a vocal ally across the diversity and inclusion agenda within Barclays and in the wider payments industry for over 10 years now, across LGBTQ, multi-ethnicity and gender, to name a few of the pillars. And now, as the proud father of a precocious 13-year-old daughter, I'm delighted to be here today and help break the bias.
Thank you, Stephen, and we'll move on to Galen.
Hey, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. You know, I think I am delighted to be here. I head up merchant sales for Bank of America. I've been with the company for almost 25 years, both in treasury services as well as recently in the last 3 years with merchant sales. I've had the opportunity to work for and work with some incredibly great women leaders. I've had the opportunity to be mentored as well as be a mentor for others, other women in this company for many years now. You know, when I think of diversity and when I think of inclusion, I think of, you know, there's no other option. It's what we do, is what we do as humans. And I think it's incredibly important to me. It always has been. And it makes what makes the company great and obviously society great. I am also fortunate to be a proud father of an 11-year-old daughter, kind of been raised by a very strong mother as well as a grandmother and 3 sisters. So I'm the youngest of 6, so have again had the opportunity to be part of women and how I've developed as an individual and as a professional.
Thank you, Galen. And we'll move to Aidan.
Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Aidan Bensusan. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Northone. Northone is an American-focused small business challenger bank, or a neobank, as some might call it. So we serve small businesses across the country and offer them, big banking services for their businesses, with the idea of building, broader financial literacy and financial management practice within small businesses across the country. And we're an earlier stage company. And so, the offensive line, the defensive line of the company, whoever's on the field, it's comprised of strong men and women all together. And it's a real pleasure to be able to, represent the incredible women at our company and beyond on this panel. And I'm really pleased to be here today. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Aidan. And finally, as Christy said, I'm John Cowan. I'm the moderator for today, and we'll take you through a lot of the different questions. Like everyone here, I have a very strong-willed, incredible daughter who's 16. I also work in a fantastic company in Payments Canada. Our CEO, Tracy Black, is a leader in the industry. Our executive leadership team with Christina and others, incredible women in payments. And this is a really important topic to us all. So given your comments on your 13-year-old daughter, Stephen, and some of the components that we have going forward, what are the tactics that you use at your firm to build a better diverse outcome?
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I think a lot of it is down to recruitment. So recruitment practices and being super clear with recruitment agencies, how you want that process to run. So demanding a diverse slate, be that across gender or any of the other inclusion vectors. And if they don't deliver, find a new agency. I think it is as simple as that. We spent some time with our agencies a couple of years back. We had got into a cycle, as a lot of financial firms had done, of recruiting males, white straight males, and we had to break that cycle. And we've made great strides on the back of having difficult conversations with agencies, but in the end, leading to the right outcome of diverse slates. And alongside that, diverse panels when it comes to the recruitment process, making sure you're getting a broad cross-section of views on potential candidates from colleagues already within the firm.
What are your thoughts, Galen, on this important topic about diversity in hiring?
Yeah, I think that Stephen said it well, and I think there's another piece that I sort of encourage my leaders, and what I take seriously is that you're always recruiting. We work in a company that has 200,000 individuals in this firm, and meeting them, whether it's at a meeting or whether it's at a reception or whether it's simply just connecting in the hallways, always building and always understanding the talent that's out there, and being conscious that you aren't setting your bias away, deliberately looking at pools of candidates that are diverse, and developing that rapport, developing that relationship over time. So when when the job comes open in your remit, you have that diverse slate that you've connected with, that in some cases you've mentored, and they can fit into that role. The other piece is I connect with other leaders in the bank all the time. It's an opportunity for me to say, I've mentored this individual. She's awesome. It's a great fit for your role. So I actually leverage internal recruiting, leverage external recruiting, but equally important is make sure I, as a leader, are recruiting all the time to know that talent and to profit that talent as roles come open.
Thanks, Galen. And I'm going to go to Aidan in a slightly different, not a startup, but how do you approach this important topic?
I mean, diversity for us isn't a question of enhancing or accelerating. It's a table stakes issue, right? We have an existential need for the best possible talent, and the talent has to be diverse. I mean, we create considerable downside risk if we have a whole bunch of folks on the team that look like each other, think like each other, have the same life references. That's an existential threat to us, because when you're earlier stage, your existence can't be taken for granted, and every decision you make has consequences. And so we have to have a group of folks internally that not only just represent our customer base, which is itself a reflection of the general population, but we have to make sure that we have absolutely the right representation across genders, across ethnicities, across sexual orientation. These are all table stakes, and the gender one is just such an obvious one. It's like a no-brainer that if we look around and we don't see the right balance, we've done something wrong. And the way that we hold ourselves accountable is we make our own internal targets, known to each other. Here's what we're trying to solve for. Like, are we, how's the last month or 2 months of our pipeline been looking, and then do we have any need to rebalance? We try to make this transparent amongst the team, because it's not just a talent recruitment question. The whole team is actually recruiting. Every single one of us knows a strong person, a strong female developer, a strong female designer or marketer, et cetera, who they can bring in. And so as soon as we tag team this, it's a problem that's imminently solvable.
Thanks, Aidan. And I think both of you and Galen, and talking about, we're always recruiting. I'll go to Naveed. How do we take risks on people during the, the great resignation, as you call it, because we're always recruiting? Yeah,
I mean, first and foremost, I think all of the panelists made great points about we're always constantly recruiting, particularly when it comes down to the great resignation, right? Like, people have options. And as we look at diverse candidates that come through the pipeline, there's something called taking that potential risk, as well as going with a gut feeling as well. There's an opportunity where we see this happen a lot more with our male employees, where folks are willing to take the risk with them, even though they don't have the full kind of potential. Even though they don't have the experience. But when it comes down to women, there seems to be a bit of a bias that if we take the risk, we might not be able to get the full output out of the job that we're hiring for. So I think that's where we need to really break the bias of kind of hiring people for potential, taking the risk, and entrusting and giving them the support that allows them the ability to learn on the job, as well as get to their full potential as well. So I think, as the great resignation that we talk about during the pandemic is happening, I think we have an opportunity as we recruit to hire on potential, to back the candidates, as well as give them an opportunity to flourish in these environments.
Thanks, Naveed. And I'm going to go back to Stephen, because you spoke earlier about, your pipeline and, firing some agencies. How do you go through that from a risk basis? How do you tell all of our colleagues who are hiring, it's okay to take some risks, but that seems like a big one to move our agency that you're used to. How did you go through that, and how did you make those type of decisions? Because it's a strong indicator of where your firm is going.
Yeah, well, I think a bit like Aidan said, it just became an absolutely non-negotiable for us to look and sound and think like the communities within which we live, and that we attempt to serve really, really well and retain as important clients and customers. We had to find a way to represent those communities far better within the firm itself. And so there was a number of activities that we took forward. We reviewed our succession planning models as an example. Did we always make sure we were striving for a 50% gender split on talent pipelines? Something as simple as color coding our succession plan made it really obvious which areas were really underrepresented in terms of women coming through that talent pipeline and into senior, even middle management, senior management, and then onwards onto board level roles. And so that piece of work was really important alongside the agency conversations. And to be fair, the agencies were ready, responded, and I think actually it's made the whole conversation with agencies more competitive, if anything, that whole debate.
If I could jump in for a moment, John, just to be able to maybe reframe the risk that we think about here, right? I think if we think about risk as, are we willing to go outside of our comfort zones and change recruiters? This is an incremental risk that will take us, 500 years to truly, move the needle. I think a lot of the folks on this panel, I'm sure others, the risk is actually the opposite. You're standing on a burning platform, and every day that goes by that you don't have enough, strong pipelines with, proper female representation coming into the company, you're at risk. And that's the risk that needs to have a fire extinguisher put on it very, very quickly. And I think, articulating it that way is at least, the way I think a lot of the folks here might think about it. And certainly we do. And it's a helpful way because it gives you a sense of impatience around, how is this not solved already? Like 2 weeks have gone by, a month, a quarter, if it's a perennial risk, we're no longer treating it, as such, right?
Aidan, it's so well said. Like, I feel impatient around how long it's taking for something that seems just right in front of us. Galen, what's your opinion on this exact topic? Because I know you have a strong view.
Well, look, I think, I think about, of being a bit redundant. You must always recruit, and you've got to get to know people. And because when you get to the point when there's a role open, you start to really box yourself in. You have a job rec and you have a resume. And, you try to tick and tie, and that's what recruiters are looking at. And I've found time and time again that if I meet these individuals and I meet strong women leaders, strong women employees across this big company, this huge company, and develop that relationship, and as I mentioned, mentor in some cases, it allows me to get beyond the boxed in of a resume and a job rec. I start to think of the individual and the talents that she brings to the table, that it might not align perfectly with a job rec, but it aligns with the talent we need as an organization for this particular role. And then you bet on that individual, and then you take that risk. And most importantly is once you take that risk, you need to help that individual. You need to continue to coach. You need to provide an environment for which they can succeed, and that you have their back all the time. And so, I've for the last 25 years, I've taken a lot of risk on talent. And I can say that, categorically, that they have paid off, not only for me professionally in the roles that I've had, but also for those individuals as they have moved on to other roles within the company. And one other thing, John, just to mention, at the end of the day, I am accountable. I am a leader. I am the hiring manager. I lead a business. I am accountable for ensuring that this happens. And I need to drive the execution of that and the outcomes of that through our recruiters, internally and externally, and most importantly, through the leaders that work for my organization.
Thanks, Galen. And I agree. I'm going to go to Naveed.
Yeah, just one thing that I'll add, what triggered a thought for me with Galen as well, right? I completely agree with him that accountability and the buck stops at us as leaders to make sure that we're creating a diverse. Look, our clients that we work with are very diverse. The globality of the products that we produce and give out to the rest of the world is very diverse. But when it comes down to our workforce, we kind of are very limited in many ways, and we have to think out of the box to make sure that is not a conversation that we're having years from now, but it becomes a norm and is part of our DNA. Hence, a lot of times, one other aspect of it is that I do a lot of encouragement for folks for particularly women that I've worked with in the past, to actually apply for a job, because there's a bit of a self-doubt and belief that you have to get them past, and really encourage them that they can actually do the job and they will actually make a difference. And I think that kind of allyship, which is from the back, giving them the support, giving them the confidence that they can do the job and make a difference, is something that we need to keep doing day in and day out.
Yeah, really well said. And when we talked about accountability and we talked about being impatient, it was interesting. Every one of us was nodding our head in agreement. So maybe I'll stay with you, Naveed, just to talk about how can there be hope? How do we, as a small group here on this panel, how do we give hope that, change is really coming and it's sustainable?
Look, we can stay here for a couple of hours and talking about it, but the couple of areas that I really look out for, particularly in our work environment, is how do we actually give support to the minority representation within our work environment, particularly Blacks and Latinas, as we hire them in an environment, right? One of the things that I look for, particularly in a meeting, as well as in our organization, is that when those females speak up, that there isn't any self-doubt in the representation that they're giving, because a lot of times I have seen this happen too much, and this is where we have an opportunity of breaking the bias again. I'm no pun intended on the hashtag, but I'll keep repeating this message, is that if a male were to kind of like make a point, there isn't any question that is asked, even if it's a stupid remark. But when a female makes a very intelligent comment, and particularly from a minority background, there is some sort of doubt that is created in the room where someone has to mansplain or someone has to actually jump in and really validate their recommendation. So those are kind of things that we have to really speak up and note for, and take it upon ourselves to create hope that there is going to be an opportunity for these female leaders to speak up, as well as have the confidence that they can make the difference.
Thanks, Naveed. Stephen, how do you see hope as we move forward in your firm?
Yeah, well, the gender pay gap has clearly been a huge point of conversation across the financial industry and more globally. And I think very clear goals around that set out by the largest firms in the world now have started to help move this conversation forward from something that was the preserve of perhaps the gender colleague network to a central goal of the main board, and that's just been so important. So I think you look to wider societal elements like gender pay gap as I think a real reason to be hopeful in this space. People reporting back on what progress they've made. Firms globally setting themselves targets and holding themselves accountable for having the right proportion of women in senior roles. And I know there's reporting that comes out on a regular basis from the large firms right across the globe, which says, despite our impatience, actually there are strides being made, lots more to do, but at least it's a conversation that's in the boardroom as opposed to in the colleague gender network.
Aidan, Stephen talked about it being in the boardroom and being, making sure it's talked about a lot. As a newer firm, how's it just part of your culture? Because I know you talk about it a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, look, not to take the word out of context, but I think it's the word hope is like such a passive word, right? It's such a kind of you're resigned to some sort of reality, and we just really hope that things will change. And I think it's just about moving to action, right? It comes from just small little things, like just honestly being quick to act when you see something that's wrong. See something, say something. If someone says something like an old colloquial saying that really has no place, meant with no harm, but it's the kind of thing that would put someone down, especially if it's gender based. You quickly take them aside, like that's not cool. You cannot have that kind of behavior here, right? Someone, no one. Very often, people don't. There are a number of people who do not mean to say things that will, put another gender down, but they do, and then we have to kind of all be accountable to educate that person so that they can be better, but almost like stamp it out in real time, right? Because as soon as we let that slide, that creates the kind of discomfort that someone sitting in the room saying, that's kind of targeted at me, and I don't feel too great right now. So I think it's moving from that impatience then to just moving to act. What are the things that we can do over the next 2 weeks that put some points on the board? I mean, maybe I have the benefit, our organization is on 150,000 people worldwide, right? So we're able to impact scale on our 100 or so folks. But what are the things that we can do in 2 weeks, in a month, and have real accountability? Like, performance, job security is often based on targets. And so, as soon as we start blending these targets into the people who are accountable for them, people move, right? People are really good at moving to incentives. If the obvious ethical, moral, social, and personal reasons to make this thing work, to make gender equality work, don't somehow convince someone, you put the incentives there and they'll move quite quickly.
Thanks, Aidan. And you're right. The word hope we shouldn't use. It should be just act, and we should be impatient around ensuring we move forward. Gayla, in a large firm, how do you act, and how do you make a change?
I got to call out Naveed. Naveed said something about mansplaining, and I get regular texts and explanations from both my daughter and wife how when I'm mansplaining. So it helps me to make sure that I'm not at work. So funny there. So look, I actually like the word hope. I think we can be hopeful. I think that our industry can be hopeful, but at the same time, it's a great start. You got to do it every day. And John, as I see it more and more, it's becoming less of sort of a, top down and far more organic in an industry in where I work. And, being organic, what I mean is every opportunity from the ground up that we can move and advance, particularly women and a diverse workforce, is what really is going to drive sustained change. So I think there absolutely is a reason for hope, but most importantly, I think we all said this, is what we do every single day to make it sustained and make it every day, and making sort of driving change in what I do as a leader, what my directs do as a leader, and what their directs do as a leader. And that helps keep this going and keep the flywheel turning to make significant material change.
Thanks, Galen. And we'll move on a little bit because we're all in the same boat. I love Galen's analogy that his wife and his daughter ensure that he keeps
no mansplaining,
very self-aware, and
yes.
Likewise, my wife and daughter does the same thing. So let's talk about how do we actually get feedback from, we're all involved in sponsorship and mentoring. Earlier today I had a incredible discussion with one of our high potentials within Payments Canada, around taking a risk, for her and how she could be an executive in the future. Stephen, how do you, in your career, as you've gone forward, you've been sponsored, you've also been a sponsor, you've been a mentor, you've been mentored. How do you get the feedback, and how does it become a true two-way street?
Yeah. So one of the great things that's been happening in our firm over the course of the last 18 months, 2 years, is reverse mentoring. So not necessarily about the senior leader being the mentor, helping an individual manage their own career, albeit that's clearly still very important and still very valid when it comes to this topic. But reverse mentoring, in a way, for me, has been even more powerful. When I delve into a conversation like this, and there's one of the new graduate intake sitting there who was born in the year 2000. It makes you feel like a million years old. But they just had a totally different life experience over their lifetime than we would have done, or I certainly would have done, coming into my 20s when I did. And therefore, listening to those expectations, listening to the way they just expect things to work as standards, listening to the way they expect a workplace and a culture to operate, listening to the way they expect technology to work for them, sets out a whole different expectation level than perhaps I would have entered the workplace with many moons ago. So reverse mentoring, I would recommend it to anyone. If you don't have a reverse mentor, get yourself one. Try and make it a really diverse colleague as well, and you'll start to really open your eyes as to how your organization works for others.
Thanks, Stephen. And, I reflect on my discussion earlier today where it was, I got probably more enjoyment out of the discussion and got more feedback than I was providing at the point this morning. So it was talking about culture of our firm. Naveed, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I mean, very similar to Stephen. I think my personal, I've got a couple of mentors, and one of them actually happens to be a female who's been with me for the last 20 years. And I've learned a lot from them. And one of the biggest learnings from there is that it's when you get into an environment where you are doing reverse mentoring, you should listen, right? There's a very, very big opportunity for us to say something because we've been successful. We've been in positions of where we get to make decisions. But I think it's very hard to stay quiet and listen. So I think that's a big opportunity from a reverse mentoring point of view of learning something new. The second one for me is that as we bring in our new analyst programs into the organization, as we bring in fresh talent, how do we actually create a safe space for them to be able to, from day one, be able to speak up, as well as be able to share their thoughts? Because if you create that environment from day one for them, then as they grow up in the organization, it's very easy for them not to feel kind of pressure of not being able to apply for a job which is above 2 pay grades, or it's something that they feel doubt about. I think creating that environment, encouraging them, is a second thing. And third piece for me is that I'm always looking in ways in which I can import talent, but more so export talent, right? Like where I see organizations which are kind of like not gender equal or even diverse equal, I will export talent from my organization to that organization, just to make sure that we are planting the seed and changing the culture and changing the environment, because those diverse ideas are needed to be flourished throughout the organization.
I'll move. Thank you, Naveed. And I think, as we go through this and we have these type of techniques that we use and people leave organizations, it continues and it propagates. So I think it's an incredible part of, what we're responsible for and action we need to take, to Aidan's earlier comments. I'll just go to Galen for final comments on, how to listen, how to reverse mentor, and how do you get feedback?
Okay, I think you have to be careful with a mentor or mentee, because it sort of implies some on a have and a have not to some degree, and sort of changing the dynamic to be sort of two-way. I can learn as much from that individual that was born in 2000 as they can learn from me. We have different experiences. I may have much longer experience that I can share with that mentee. But at the same time, they can help me understand what their experiences are today and coming up through college graduate or an MBA and into the business world. So I've always thought of I try not to do that mentor mentee. It's really, I connect with an individual. They have different professional wants and needs. I have different professional wants and needs, and we share experiences with each other, and that helps us be more of on a level footing to say, hey, you have a lot to offer and things that I can understand, and likewise. And so that doesn't mean that I won't advocate. I'm going to advocate for that individual, and I'm going to continue to advocate for that individual. But at the same time, I can learn just as much from them as they can from me. And I think it's really important to establish that dynamic with our women leaders, because I don't think it should be, I happen to sit in an office and you're coming into my office and I'm talking to you about all the things that you can do, in really changing the dynamic to be far more engaging, far more equal in those discussions and experience, and how I can help and advocate for each other.
Thanks, Galen. And you talked about the office, and it's a great segue given what's happened during COVID. I'm going to go to Aidan to talk about, what does the future look like in terms of the new hybrid work environment? What are the gains and losses as we talk about this topic as we go forward? And I know your firm, is in the heart of, San Francisco, or, the new normal for new work. Aidan, what do you think of what the future of work looks like?
We all work anywhere, candidly. Like, our offices now are places where people can meet each other. Maybe they need space outside of a cramped apartment or a noisy house. But we are, at least in our case, we're set up to be remote first, with a nice, every now and then, a nice opportunity to meet in an office or have a place to work that is outside of one's home. And I think that the COVID, and especially for those places which people had to work from home, has actually been quite difficult on women. It was in the best articulation, it was a mixed bag, but I think realistically, it put disproportionate pressure on female professionals. When the ability to kind of move to an office where there's kind of a separation of place between home and work existed, and I think there's statistics out there showing how many women had to fall out of the workplace during COVID because of that, and we've got to be able to readjust. I mean, a lot of the gains I think that were made over the last few decades or so might have been erased. And so in the future, I think we have to just recognize that there are different solutions for everybody. Some people will absolutely need the office. We got a lot of people starting their careers with us, and they're working in a 300 square foot apartment. Like, that's their home, that's their kitchen, that's their shower, and that's their office. And so that for their mental health, they need a place to work. But we've also got women in our company who have families, and having them home when there are kids around, et cetera, is an enormous difficulty. So I think it's about starting to have a more nuanced approach to workplace configuration, thinking about the different life experiences that people have, especially women, and making sure that we can set them up for success as best as possible. Conversely, the obligation is on us is to not actually deselect folks that don't have the right setup to be able to be promoted or prioritized in the workplace. It should not be because a woman has a newborn running around or kids like in our family that they should not have the opportunities that they want. And we have to typically go and make sure that they know that that's the case, and that across the organization it's an assumption that this should not impede anybody if it's their choice. And that just takes individual and I guess system-wide effort sometimes.
Thanks, Aidan. I'm going to go to Steve on the same topic, but if it's okay, if you can talk about, to end on what Aidan said, how do we make sure people aren't forgotten when they are working from home and they know that we're here and their careers are still important to us in this new environment?
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with Aidan that, it's been a mixed experience for certainly the female colleagues I've spoken to over the period. Some have found some upside in the experience. Others, as you say, found it difficult and maybe have found it more difficult to balance that work-life picture. I mean, at least with COVID, if there's any upside to it at all, it has introduced a whole new level of debate around the work-life balance conversation. And it has seen as well, I think, a subset at least of the male population trying to balance dealing with a higher proportion of domestic duties and work than they ever have had to previously. And certainly colleagues I've spoken to, a whole new appreciation for what, the traditionally, at least, women have had to balance a lot more than men. A further point I would make would be, as we return to office, that the things we need to try and keep in mind as we reset ourselves for perhaps hybrid working. Let's continue to give voice to balancing domestic requirements with a challenging career in payments, as an example. Let's make sure we have the opportunity for women, men, whoever, to try and make sure they get the most of life, that they make the most of a fantastic career, but they're also making the most of their domestic setup and can look back at the end of their career and say that actually that balance was a lot better than, for example, my parents would probably say they managed to achieve. And as we reconfigure office environments, let's take the opportunity to look at the diversity angle. So let's always have a creche or some sort of childcare provision as we reopen those office workplaces. Let's create unisex toilets, for example, in support of the trans community. Lots of different, I think, diversity angles that we can consider as we moving back to returning to office. And of course, COVID is not all about parents of young children. That was probably a conversation we had most here, certainly at work. But, there are carers of all ages, single colleagues living on their own who had a very different experience. So I think it's important for us to maintain focus on all of those different colleague groups as we move forward.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'll go finally to Naveed on this topic. What does the future of work look like for you and your team?
I mean, look, for us, I look at the pandemic as a great equalizer, as I call it, particularly to the point that Stephen made, right, where our male colleagues got the understanding of how our female employees and associates have to balance life between work and home. Particularly as they had to kind of take upon some of the domestic responsibilities, taking care of child. And it was good to see some of our male colleagues with the kids in their laps during meetings as well, because they had to balance those duties. For me, I think going back to what Aidan has mentioned, right? For us, it's create an environment in which anyone can get their work done from anywhere, but giving them the flexibility. So for us, I think it's going to be a model in which we're going to have a few days at work and few days from home. That's something that we are encouraging at our firm level. The second thing is that when you are on a Zoom meeting, I think it also gives an opportunity for you to call out on some of those folks who are staying quiet on those calls and really encourage them to speak up. I think in that environment, I think it's also helped us to hear the opinions from our female employees a lot more than you would have actually been being in a meeting room and have someone else on the call as well, right? Like, so I think sometimes you forget the folks who are on the phone when you're just concentrating the people in the room. So I think for those two angles, I look at like it's a new norm that we're setting for the future, which is the ability of working from anywhere and just balancing in the voices that are being heard in the room.
Naveed, thank you for your comments. I would just add, after all of your comments, my wife and my daughter Charlotte often say it's a lot of John at the moment because during COVID, because I used to leave at 8 and get home at leave at 6 and get home at 8, and they make that comment. So now I'm a little self-doubting myself, and maybe that's a great segue over to Galen on a topic of, I hear, in our pre-discussion on this, you talked about how you really encourage your team and women especially to go for it, the self-doubt versus males applying for roles. Galen, can you talk through your techniques that everyone should use for their careers as they go forward who are listening today?
Look, I mean, I think of my conversations with women, for many years, and I think about job opportunities or women that have worked on my staff or worked with on my team today. And what I've always tried when building that rapport and coaching those individuals, where I did do this simple thing. We get into a conversation and it's a one-on-one or it's a year end, and the wants and needs, the professional wants and needs of that individual is always like the last of the conversation. In other words, you talk about everything else for the first 40 minutes of for 25 minutes of a 30-minute meeting, and then the real important stuff is at the last 5 minutes, and you run out of time. And so what I've tried to do is really change that dynamic where whenever whether I'm mentoring or whether I'm connecting with an individual, I talk, okay, let's talk about the wants and needs first. Okay. And they may be difficult. They may be challenging. They may be pushing me, but let's talk about that first. And that helps me to make sure that I'm focusing enough time on what's really important to that individual, what's really important to that individual's profession and what they need to contribute. And then that helps me to align, okay, you've got what it takes. You're talented, you're a multi-tool athlete. You can absolutely step up and get after it. And I think that too often you can default into, okay, what are the metrics? What are the KPIs? And okay, you're doing great here. You're not great. No, I think, really changing that to get after what's really important first, prioritizing that first, and enabling enough feedback and enough runway to give advice and to give coaching or just simply to listen, I think helps build that confidence. I think that helps build sort of a better rapport with that person, and that sort of hopefully will drive them to do more and help me to advocate more for them.
Thanks, Galen. We'll move to Aidan on the same topic of how you ensure women's ideas are heard and how do you help people go for it?
I think it's a team sport, right? I have a role to play. Our leadership team has a role to play, and even the new folks on the team who just get onboarded have a role to play in here, because it's not a thing that you can hero mode it into existence, right? It really does require a broad strategy. So I think in terms of empowering women in the workplace, it goes from making sure that there are some very clear norms that our leadership team all agree with. That's how you kind of make it onto that leadership team. It's one of the qualifications. If we're out of step on values, then there's nothing to talk about. And then we think about how do we make sure that, the norms about, bringing women into the right, discussions, making sure they're not left out, giving people space to speak in a discussion. Some people like to go last, some people like to listen. That doesn't mean that they're disengaged, and it doesn't mean that they're shy. I mean, they process differently. That could be a man or woman thing, but we specifically have to keep an eye on those folks that we know, especially like in women who, overwhelmingly over the last decades have been marginalized in so many of these conversations. And I think, collectively as a team, we need to have a degree of almost impatience, right? Angry impatience that this should still exist in our organization. And we have the benefit, of course, that we're building something from the ground up. So we kind of get to somehow write our own rules a little bit in the process. But those rules have to be, with a degree of anger, saying like, this cannot be. We have an opportunity to change the reality for some folks here. We must do better, and it requires that. And then I think the last piece of it requires education. Like we can't just declare one day, the problem solved, right? And we go home. I mean, are we checking ourselves? Are we looking at even the copy we write on the job descriptions? Do we find that is inclusive to women? Are there any things that we're doing, even, constantly kind of almost like a doctor's checkup to make sure that, our hygiene as well, because it's so easy for these things to slip in the wrong direction. And everybody's got to have almost like a laser eye focus that it's all tracking in the right way.
John, I would like to add a couple of things that Ethan and Galen said that reminded me of something that I've done quite a bit as a conscious effort. There are times in which you are in big meetings and you will kind of like end up having a one-on-one with someone, and most of the times when it's with your women employees, they'll come up and share something brilliant that you should have spoken up in a meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you actually encourage them to actually not share that idea in private, but more in a public setting, to give them the confidence? So next time around, when I actually have kind of a follow-up to that topic, I will actually make it a conscious effort to mention to everyone in the room that I was having this conversation with, I'm just using the name Sarah, and she had something really interesting to add to the dynamic, and we should actually start the conversation with listening to her first. In private, you've already actually spoken to them, given them the confidence, given them the ability to, in a safe environment, to share that idea as well. So I think that also kind of like goes a long way in which, as Ethan mentioned, creating the norm and creating the change. You can actually start doing that a lot more if you give them the confidence in a private setting as well.
I saw Stephen nodding his head during all of those comments, Naveed. We're all trying our best. Stephen, your comments on this topic around, how people are heard, and you're absolutely right, Naveed. It's not just women. There's different introverts, extroverts, on Zoom, not on Zoom, on camera, not on camera. There's so many different components to it. Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think the worst thing you can do is make assumptions about any individual. As you say, male, female, any area of society that people come from, we're all individuals, and some of us will prefer to be reflective in a meeting, listen to the debate, and then go and talk to Naveed separately afterwards with our great idea. And you're right, Naveed, it's then about how do you bring that to the fore, and certainly not try and steal it for yourself, as I'm sure you never would. But yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily a male-female thing. I think it is a more, as you say, John, an introvert, extrovert. Let's try and find a way for all different personality types to contribute in a meeting setting. And that does take effort, and it takes effort in the meeting. Some people would prefer to be asked for their opinion, for example. Other people would hate to be asked and put on the spot, and you just need to work out who those people are. One tactic that I've developed, for example, over time is trying to send out an agenda of the discussion items, a day before the meeting, so those people who are more reflective can have that time to think through the conversation that we're going to have and come with some pre-prepared perspectives, as opposed to feeling like they've been put on the spot. So that's feedback I've had before, that's one way of addressing, but certainly a complex area. And I think increasingly, the trick of leadership is finding about how do we get the most out of the different personalities we work with.
Some of the most incredible people I've worked with are so different to myself. That's what I find important in my leadership group. I call out someone like Alison James, who's from CIBC, an incredible, thoughtful leader who made me better because she was quiet, I was probably louder, and she made me quieter and her louder. So I think it's right. It's about fit for purpose as we move forward. Time is running a little short here, and I think it's important we wrap this to make sure, and I'll give each one of our panelists just over a minute to talk about what are the actions we should take now. What should people take from this discussion? And I'm going to go to Aidan first to make sure there are actions. You talk about, I like the word angry. I do feel frustrated that it's not moving fast enough, but how do we make this happen, Aidan? And how do we change, so we don't have to have International Women's Day? I just wish it was just the norm. Aidan.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I mean, I genuinely believe that there's only so far that well, good intentions go, and people feeling it from a deep place in their heart. That often bumps up against reality. It's what you're measured on. It's what you're talking about. It's what you're incentivized. Your whole life revolves then around, like, how am I being incentivized? What are the role models that I see, and how are they being successful? And I think it's about thinking, what's the time limit, right? Like, how do we solve this in not like 50 years? How do we solve this in 5 years? Like, what are the things that are going to solve this in 5 years amongst our group, right? I don't know about the rest of the world. Like, it's not my purview, but certainly within our group, how do we make sure that in the next quarter we've solved this specific problem? So it's about, identifying this is the big thing we're going to go all in on, pipeline, or feelings of emotional safety, right, for women in the workplace, whatever might be the thing that you think will move the needle. And then we all reverse engineer what are our goals, right? How do we kind of measure ourselves against that and be extremely impatient about it? And it has to cascade, and it needs both, understanding what the objective is. If we just say do better, it's just so easy for goodwill to get dissipated to thin air. What we really need to have is say, to do better, we must do this by the end of the quarter or the year or whatever you want to have it. And then in order to do that, here's how we're going to measure it. Here's the role modeling. Everybody has to be prepared to act the way that we want them to act. And then we hold ourselves accountable. We say we failed. Let's hold a post-mortem. Why did that happen? I think it's an iterative process, but it's got to be one where the timelines are like super compressed, because it's going to take so many at-bats for different organizations to get this right. Every organization has its own DNA, and we have to move with the starting point as opposed to the ideal endpoint that I think we all want to get to as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Aidan. We're going to go to Stephen next to wrap up his comments around all of this. Aidan, again, I like the word angry earlier because I don't feel I'm angry about it, but I just want to make sure it's done. And having those really strict deadlines is an incredible, it doesn't matter. As a manager, that's an incredible piece of the puzzle. Stephen.
Yeah. Whether it's angry, whether it's frustrated, it's certainly something which needs to create an emotion which leads to change, and a force for change within an organization. I mean, simply put, from my side, where the proportion of women is low, that is, just as Aidan said earlier on, an existential threat to that team, and it's going to lead to suboptimal outcomes. So you need to address that. You need to work on the pipeline. You need to make proactive changes if possible. You need to look into the realms of talent moves to get some of the great female talent you will have in your organization into those teams where proportion of females is low, and make secondments. We have to balance the picture, or else we will continue to get suboptimal business outcomes.
Thank you, Stephen. And no one here wants suboptimal business outcomes. So it seems like a simple thing to be not frustrated, but angry. Naveed.
A state of nirvana for me would be that there is a Women in Ally panel that is talking about how we should be including men in the conversation. That would be a state of nirvana for me. The other piece is for the angry portion for me on this one, John, is that it's still a very big taboo, even though as much as conscious effort that we're putting in to have a topic, it's still crazy that in 2022 we're still talking about it, right? Like, how do we make this as a normal function going forward, so that when my daughter is walking into a workforce and she's 19, she's not feeling these biases as she's growing her career, right? Like, so that's what I would like to see. And I would like to see a women ally panel next year from a PACE perspective.
Thank you, Naveed, and I agree wholeheartedly. And finally, Galen, your thoughts on the actions people should take from this panel and what you do personally.
Yeah, look, I would not use anger. I think I'm more impatient than anything else. And I think that I also sort of disappointed in the opportunity cost, because we have such great talent, great diverse talent, and providing them the access to better roles, leadership roles, is what will make our company better. It will make our society better. And so I think that's where I'm impatient. That's where I'm frustrated. I think they mentioned this. You know, I want my daughter to have those opportunities when she grows up. I think the tools. I mean, I think that all of us have to have different expectations. And I know we've had different expectations, but I think our expectations have to get greater and greater and greater and different to our leaders, that we expect that we make strides here, that we expect that this is the norm, that we expect that we get to a diverse leadership at all levels within the companies that we serve. And I think that expectation should be set among all of our employees. That helps drive decisions. That help drives what we need to produce as an organization, as an institution, as a culture. So I continue to be impatient, and I will be, and that drives me to make substantive changes in my remit, as well as expect that from the leaders that I work with and those that I work for.
Incredible. Well, it's incredible that we've taken 57 minutes so quickly. It's just flown past. I was lucky enough to talk to all of our panelists before this, and there's so many important points to take from this. Take action. Make sure you have great discussions with your team. I'd like to thank Naveed, Stephen, Aidan, and Galen for your time today. I know you're available to many of the people who are watching in on this subcast today. And clearly, all of us are trying to break the bias. And I'm sorry to use that pun, but we really are. And I can see it in each one of you. And I thank you for the participation today. At this point, I'll invite Christy to rejoin and for final words. Christy, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Wow, this discussion was really, really inspiring. Thank you to all of the panelists, as well as John Cowan, one of our former Advocate for Women award winners. Thank you all for providing your insights. And I'm going to give you a quote that someone texted me just during this discussion, and that was, wow, this panel is outstanding. If every corporation, every organization, big, medium, or small, adopted the attitudes of the male leaders on this panel, gender parity and equality between the genders would happen tomorrow. So thank you all for your leadership, for your insights into hiring, coaching, supporting women, mentoring and reverse mentoring, changing policies to be more women friendly, giving women a voice and recognition. Thank you, everybody, for listening in to this discussion. Some of the takeaways that I really liked, Galen's let's just change the expectations and just make it happen. So thank you. This was a fabulous discussion. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and happy International Women's Day, and good luck to break the bias.